Hello, Education 2220 students. I hope everyone had a great week last week. So, last week, our focus was continuing our work with our lesson plans, specifically focusing on those universal design for learning, those three components, right, that help us make a good lesson plan when we're being diverse um, in how we're selecting activities and really looking at the differences of trying to not have issues at the forefront, like looking at, okay, what could be some barriers and how could I overcome those challenges? So now we're going to really switch our focus a little bit and move into behavior, which is a very important section that we have in this course. So, Module 7 is going to be about classroom management and behavior strategies, but we're going to be looking specifically in inclusive classrooms, right? So, we're going to explore the different types of behavioral needs that students have, what could be some individualized assessments, what are some interventions, and then how is this really related or connected to the UDL principles, right? Because when we're thinking about being supportive in the classroom, we really want to make sure that families, we're collaborating with them, we're collaborating with colleagues, really want to support that pro-social skill development, the self-regulation, looking at independence, right? Those sorts of behaviors. So, what are you really going to be able to do? So, we have our course outcomes listed here. Our objectives for this module is going to be describe characteristics of challenging behaviors associated with diverse learners in observable, measurable terms. So, that's part of that big component in this module is really looking at how do we assess, but before we can assess, we really need to learn how to define those characteristics. What are the characteristics or those behaviors that we see, and how do we turn them into observable, measurable terms? And that's part of that big assessment component. And what kind of strategies? So we're going to identify strategies to reinforce appropriate behaviors, reduce negative or unproductive behaviors, and teach new behaviors using those UDL principles. Describe teacher led and student initiated mediation. Explain the importance of collaboration with colleagues and parents to support the generalization of pro social skills. And then lastly, summarize different ways to meet the behavioral needs of diverse students to create positive social learning environments. Okay, and all of those are going to help meet our course outcomes here. So, I always give you standards. We'll get to that in a minute. I first want you to look at the keywords and concepts. These are very important. This helps guide your reading. It's kind of like your map of where we're going with this chapter, right? So we are obviously looking at universal design for learning and behavior, right? So how do those principles support behavior management? How do we create those environments to reduce those barriers? Thinking about engaging students in self-regulation, excuse me. Positive behavioral interventions and supports, also known as PBIS. What are those in the school system? Why is this important? Why does it matter? Functional behavior assessment. That's an assessment component, how we're assessing to identify what are those challenging behaviors, but also what's the purpose of them, right? Um, and we need to figure out why it's happening. Classroom management strategies, culturally responsive behavior supports, collaboration and communication. And then, of course, these are ones that we've seen throughout UDL, but there's some new terminology in here. Collaborative problem solving, student engagement, discipline practices, self regulation, behavior intervention plan, right? Functional behavior assessment. So these are all keywords for studying in this chapter. Now, the standards that you're going to be aligning with in terms of our teacher preparation in task standards, you're going to be looking at learner development, learning environment, professional learning and ethical practices, and then leadership and collaboration. Now, under Council for Exceptional Children, we're going to be looking at standards 1, 2, 4, and 5. So we're going to meet learner development, individual learning differences, excuse me. And there's two standards there that we're meeting: learning environments, assessment, because we have that behavioral assessment component, and then instructional planning and strategies. So we're going to hit quite a bit of standards with this module. Now, you will be using chapter 11 in your textbook. So, in the Teaching in Today's Inclusive Classrooms textbook, but I did also want you to look at chapter 7 in that um, additional text I gave you, the PDF. We call it supplemental text. In chapter 7 is really going to connect and go along with chapter 11, specifically looking at managing behavior and how do we support students. So it's really going to have those strategies you need when we're collaborating with families and specialists. So it's a really good idea for you. I went ahead and put the link here if you didn't download it or save it, so it's okay. So that's going to be your reading for this week. I gave you the outline from the publishing company for our textbook, and I gave you the PowerPoint. They're always there if you want them. You don't have to use them. Some students like them, so that's why I put them there. I gave you a web page because to look at. I always tell you I give you lots of resources. I know that some of them we don't have time to really dive deep into, but I want you to be able to go back and look at it later. But this is going to be that part of that key terminology we talked about, manifestation determination, like what it is and how does it play a role when we're talking about challenging behaviors and what do we do. And then I also gave you PowerPoint, which this one I really would like you to go through because this is really going to talk about functional behavior and what it is. I'm not going to go through a lot of it for the sake of time, but this one is really good because it's going to kind of help you with your homework assignment, but also dive deeper into what are those underlying reasons for behavior. So whenever we're doing a functional behavioral assessment or FBA, it's important for us to not only be able to find those behaviors, but find out what is the trigger. So, what is that underlying reason why this keeps happening? Okay, we always say behavior communicates something, right? Whether the student is meaning to or not, it's communicating something to you, whether it's good or bad. And a lot of times they're not consciously aware that they're even doing these things. We know that sometimes it could be a learned response or it could be environmental factor. Think about students who you have who are sensitive to lots of noises or lights, sensory overload. It could be the way that your room is laid out, who they're sitting next to, the organization. So there's a lot of environmental factors that play a role. Um, and then it goes into talk about what's the difference between a functional behavior assessment and then a behavior intervention plan. And then how do we use that behavior intervention plan once we get that functional behavioral assessment? So this really is like an approach to go beyond just stating what the child is doing, but looking at what undesired behavior is being displayed and then what's the function or the reason behind that. That way you can go and do your behavior intervention plan. Okay. And there's ways that the book's going to talk you through it, but how you define behavior is very important. Okay. You can't just say little Johnny's being bad, right? It has to be something that's measurable. Think about an action word you can measure. An action has a distinct onset and offset when we're talking about behavior. It's measurable, observable, there's an on and off. So when we're defining behavior, we can't see disrespectful as something that's measurable because what you think is disrespectful could be completely different than what I think is disrespectful, right? It's suggested. It's subjective. So what we want to look at is keywords that is going to show exactly what it's doing. So instead of disrespectful, you could put he argues when given direction. See, that is actually going to be more descriptive and give me a better indication of what's going on. There's always ways to rewrite the behavior that is going to make more sense to the other person reading it. Now, whenever you're conducting this FBA or this functional behavior assessment, there's steps that we follow. You identify the problem, you collect your data by doing multiple assessments. You analyze the data. You make determinations and hypotheses. Then you develop and implement a behavior intervention plan, and then you evaluate progress and follow up as necessary. And this is really good because we walk through each step with you on how you actually would identify the problem, right? And give you that language and terminology and specific terms to use. When you identify the problem, what kinds of questions should you be asking yourself? Is the problem related to academics or a skill deficit or something else? Um, does the student have the skill? And this is important because sometimes, especially with littles, because I lived in that realm for so long, we think that they automatically know how to be good, how to sit. What does not being disruptive mean? What does, you know, participating in this activity look like? In certain settings, they don't have the skill set for that. For whatever reason, they may not know what you mean when you say, okay, it's carpet time. We all need to be on our best behavior. Like, we need to participate. Well, what does participating look like to them? They don't know. So sometimes, really, they don't have the skill set, and you really have to break it down for them. So that's something you need to ask questions too. Um, and is it inappropriate? And when is it happening, right? Once you get that data and you start collecting it, we look at what kinds of data do we want to use. Well, when we're doing a complete functional behavior assessment, we have to collect both types of data, which is indirect and direct. So, indirect is going to be those things like interviews from the parents or other teachers who have that student. Maybe an interview from you if you're the child's regular teacher, rating skills, right? Those are the indirect data. Then you're going to have that direct data where you observe the child in the setting, mainly where it's happening. Then we're going to collect those types of assessment, right? Also, I did want to mention interviews could be with the child as well if the child is of an appropriate age. And then here's some examples of the indirect data, like if you were going to interview, these are the questions you might ask. Um, Direct assessment, right? There's a couple of different ones we can look at. The main ones I would really focus on are the ones we're going to be doing this week, which is the ABC observation, and then we're going to do like the event recording, interval recording, but there's also duration recording and latency. But it talks about all of these. Now, my favorite one is I really like, and you can use it in a lot of settings with lots of different age groups, is going to be ABC. And ABC stands for antecedent, behavior, and consequence. So antecedent, think of it as a trigger. What events occurred right before the behavior was displayed? Okay, so allows you to predict where, like during what routine and when it happened, what was the trigger event. Behavior is, again, going back to what we first talked about, the behavior has to be in measurable terms. Being aggressive, no. Talking back is a better way to say that, or disrespectful when asked given direction, right? So observable terms, that's the behavior. You list exactly what's happening. You don't feel anything. It's specific, it's objective, it is measurable, it has an onset, offset. That's the behavior. And then the consequence is what happens to that student after the behavior occurs, right? So whenever you begin with the ABCs, you always begin with the behavior because you have to define what is happening. So the student does what? The student talks back or is argumentative when given direction, right? Two, next, antecedent. When does this happen? What happened right before? Okay, well, we know maybe whenever he has to have given directions, that's when he will talk back or argue. And then what happens to the student whenever this is occurring? What do you do? What kind of consequences there for the child? Um, nine out of actually probably 9.9 times 99.9 times the consequence is going to definitely be whether it will increase or decrease. So whatever you're doing, if it's not working, it's going to continue to not work. That's why we look at multiple assessments, indirect, indirect, both. But the next section's really neat because I want you, it really goes back to what we're talking about when we say consequences. Um, this is a video about a boy named Cameron who has some behavior issues in class, and I want you to pay attention when you watch this. Uh, excuse me, not Cameron, Joseph. we are going to watch Joseph, and I want you to look at what's happening with Joseph and what his consequences are. And did he accomplish what he set out to do? Because remember, we always say behavior means you're trying to communicate something. So you're either trying to gain something, right, or get out of something. And let's see if if you're able to figure out what Joseph's wanting to do. So remember, consequences either increase or decrease the probability that behavior will occur. Think about what this teacher's doing in the video and if the behavior is going to continue or increase. Okay. So what are you going to do for assessments? Well, I have a few things for you to do. Um, you have your Module 7 quiz, and remember, you can take that as many times as you would like during that window of opportunity. But you have two things here that I want you to look at. The first one is going to be the IRIS module, which is the functional behavior assessment. And what you're going to do is when you click on it, it's going to take you here. I want you to go through um, the IRIS module, and then at the end, you're going to see the assessment, which has 7 questions. I want you to put those in a Word document, and then I want you to submit those um, to the Dropbox. And I'm going to show you in a minute where I want you to put them. So that's the first thing you're going to do. The second thing you're going to do, this is more for practice, okay? I'm going to grade both of them, but I'm not going to be too hard on the case study recording behavior one because it's something that we're new to, and I really just want us to have practice to see what it's like to collect some recording data. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to read and look at this Iris Center case study measuring behavior. And what specifically I want you to look at is the different types of recording data. Remember, these are direct datas of what you can collect and how you would do a duration, right? Or a latency and what it's measuring. So this is a great resource for you. The second is you're going to watch a video recording, okay? This is of a little girl. I want you to watch through this, and you're going to use a recording form to document her behavior. And what you're going to do is you're going to watch it twice. The first time, just watch it through. You're not going to make notes or anything. The second one, you're going to fill out a recording form, and I want you to record to see if you think that her behavior is a problem. Right, so I have a worksheet here that's going to go with the video where it says practice data sheet. What I want you to do is you will do two things. You will tally each time a behavior occurs and what was the length. The length of the observation is 2 minutes and 30 seconds because this is what we put on the stopwatch. And in the video, you're going to be hearing a beep. Every time you beep, that's what we call intervals, right? Which we'll get to in a minute. But you're going to hear a beeping, and that's just the stopwatch beeping. But what we want to do is tally every time she makes a comment, whether to herself or to her friends and off task, you're going to put a tally mark. And then what's the length? And what you're going to do with frequency is you're going to divide the number of tallies by how long you observed her. And that's going to give you how often this behavior is occurring. It's what we call frequency rate. Okay. The bottom section is where you're going to be listening for those beeps. So the beeps are every 20 seconds. So within 20 seconds, did you see this behavior, unwanted behavior happen? If you put a plus, that means it happened. If nothing happened and she did what she was supposed to and stayed on task, then uh you just you put minus because nothing happened. But if it did happen, I want a plus and I want you to tell me exactly what it was. And what you're going to do is add up all the behaviors and divide them, right? Um, and you're going to get your percentage there. Okay, so your total numbers and intervals by the intervals decoded, right? So say she did the behavior twice. I had 8 intervals, right? 8 beeps. So you would do 2 divided by 8, and then that would give you your codes and your interval rate. Okay, so you're going to look for 2 rates here. You're going to look for frequency and interval. But I did want to show you, I gave you an example, which I feel like is helpful. I always like examples. So if you click on this, it's going to bring up an example of the rate of how you work it out and then of the coding for the interval beeps here. Okay. So you will submit that to Dropbox. Remember, this one's just practice. The one that I'm going to be grading you on is going to be the first one, the iris module. But I still want you to work and practice doing recording behavior for both frequency and interval. And I can give you feedback on that. All right, that pretty much takes care of this module 7. Please feel free to reach out. I know when we start working on frequency data or intervals, it's a little confusing. If you have any questions about this, please feel free to reach out. And also, if you did not turn in last week, we had our interview journal or our work-based learning paper. Please feel free to email me if you've not, because we need to get that submitted, and I need to talk to you about that. So feel free to reach out to me. I probably have already sent you an email, but if I haven't and you have any questions or you need to do it, email me back. All right. I hope everyone has a great week. Until next time, take care.